Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have the disaster. We talk a lot about Chernobyl, but how often do we really discuss how this disaster actually happened in the first place? What actually went on that caused it? The Chernobyl nuclear disaster occurred on April 26, 1986 in Ukraine, which at the time was a part of the Soviet Union. During a routine safety test, a series of errors and design flaws led to an explosion in reactor 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The explosion caused a massive fire that released radioactive material into the atmosphere, which was carried by wind across Ukraine, Belarus, and other parts of Europe. The disaster was caused by a combination of factors, including a flawed reactor design, a lack of safety, and human error. During the safety test, the reactor's power output dropped to dangerously low levels, leading to an attempt to restore power that resulted in a sudden surge. This caused the reactor to overheat, leading to a steam explosion that destroyed the reactor's upper structure. The accident caused immediate deaths due to the explosion, as well as long-term health effects from exposure to radiation. The Chernobyl disaster remains the worst nuclear accident in history in terms of the number of deaths and the environmental impact. It led to significant changes in nuclear safety regulations and increased awareness of the potential risks of nuclear power. In our number 9 spot today we have the operator. This story is one that comes directly from Alexei Brius, who is a control room operator at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, and this is his story of the day of the disaster, which starts as he was traveling on a bus to work on April 26, 1986, knowing nothing of the historic disaster that occurred just hours before. As he arrived, he thought, quote, "It looked like it would be a mass grave. I was sure that the whole night shift had died there." He continued on to say, quote, "At the moment of the explosion, I was in Pripyat in my flat. I was sleeping tightly. I didn't hear, I didn't see anything. In the morning, I was to go to work, and so I did. I knew nothing about the disaster. I just got on a bus and went to work. As I was coming close to the station, I saw from the bus that the block was destroyed. I always say that my hair stood on its end when I saw that. I didn't understand why me and other workers were brought there, but it turned out that there was still much work to be done. Me and my coworkers got off the bus and tried to enter the territory of the 4th block as we were supposed to. There was a guard wearing a rubber-coated army suit who had orders not to let anyone in. Finally, they agreed. The guarding sergeant gave us each a pill of potassium iodide. I took it immediately. It was a special medicine made to protect the thyroid gland from radiation. All my life, I remember him with gratitude. The upper part of the reactor and the separator barrel were open. The main circulating pump was seen from the outside. Down the reactor, I saw the reactor's emergency cooling system all ruined. Its pieces were mixed with slabs of concrete. I was stepping over lumps of black graphite. I didn't want to admit what I saw, just like many other people, that it was black graphite." Alexei goes on to explain that he and the other operators had to, quote, "save those injured by fire, debris, hot water, and steam and radiation. We were to find them, carry them out, and deliver them to the medical personnel and go look for others. We saved and brought everybody out except for one person. He is still somewhere there inside the reactor." In our number 8 spot today, a bit of a bit of a break in the really dark story, we have cows. Alright, cows can cheer anybody up. The area around Chernobyl was known for its agriculture before the disaster, so of course that means there were definitely a lot of cows that could be found. While many people who were forced to evacuate had to leave their animals behind, since farm animals are not only expensive but can also be used as a source of income, many people took their farm animals with them. Unfortunately, however, many of these animals had already been exposed to the radiation in some capacity, and while it didn't affect them right away, the newer generations saw much more of the effects. In 1989, many farmers began reporting birth defects in their animals, some being much more severe than others. As time went on, the cows became less mutated, but that doesn't mean the effects went away. As the cows continued to graze on feed that was contaminated, the effects became more internal. This has led to completely normal-looking cows near the exclusion zone to begin producing milk that is toxic and not fit for consumption. While some of the outside and more visible effects of the radiation has worn off, there are still many unseen effects that continue to be prevalent today. In our number 7 spot today we have the liquidators. In the immediate aftermath of the disaster, Soviet authorities sent in robots to help with the cleanup efforts in the most hazardous areas. This was an amazing idea until the robots quickly became damaged or destroyed by the high levels of radiation in the environment. The robots faced several challenges, including damage to their electronic components and problems with their movement systems. The high levels of radiation also made it difficult for the robots to function, as the radiation would interfere with the robots' sensors and their controls. Of course, with robots out of the picture, humans were the ones who continued with the cleanup efforts. Known as liquidators, these people were primarily Soviet military personnel, firefighters, and volunteers who were tasked with containing the radioactive material and preventing further contamination, and they faced extreme danger and were exposed to high levels of radiation. Many of these people were working without proper protective gear and in close proximity to the highly radioactive material. Despite these dangers, the liquidators worked tirelessly to contain the disaster and prevent further harm. Many of the liquidators suffered from acute radiation sickness, with symptoms including nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Long-term health effects including cancer and other illnesses have also been reported among the liquidators. The liquidators played a very vital role in preventing further harm from the Chernobyl disaster, and they are often referred to as heroes for their bravery and their sacrifice. Many have received recognition and awards for their efforts, but many continue to suffer from the long-term health effects of their exposure to the radiation. In our number 6 spot today, we have the abandoned amusement park. The Pripyat amusement park, located in the town of Pripyat in Ukraine, was set to open on May 1st, 1986, just days after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. The park was intended to be a celebration of the town's prosperity and the Soviet Union's technological achievements, but it never opened its doors to the public due to the disaster. The park features a Ferris wheel, bumper cars, a carousel, and other rides which still stand today as an eerie reminder of the town's abandoned past. The Ferris wheel is particularly haunting, with rusted and decaying carts. The amusement park was never fully completed and its rides were never tested or operated, and today it serves as a chilling symbol of the devastating impact of the Chernobyl disaster on the town and its people. Despite the danger posed by the high levels of radiation in the area, the Pripyat amusement park has become a popular destination for tourists seeking to witness the haunting beauty of the abandoned rides and the town itself. In our number 5 spot today, we have The Pilot. This is another first-hand account from right after the disaster, and this one comes from Igor Pismensky, who was a helicopter navigator following the disaster. After the meltdown, helicopter crews were sent out to try and spread decontamination materials over the site. One of these crews was actually killed trying to do this work after they crashed at the site. Of the disaster, Igor said, quote, "They told us there had been an explosion at the plant, so they needed our help. The mission was, after the firemen, to drop down loads of stuff from helicopters to the destroyed reactor. First sand, then lead, dolomite, boron. We would load up about 15 kilometers distance from the reactor. They would put sandbags into parachutes, then we would take off and pass around in a conveyor fashion. There would be a circle of up to 40 helicopters in the air, which would fly over and right above the reactor every 2 to 3 minutes. No one opened the windows. The chopper was all shut, but it was not airtight. It was not protected against radiation. The view of the destroyed reactor down below, after the main fire had been put out, you could see separate glowing reddish fire beds in the first days. This was the view from the height of 200 meters. Of course, we knew this was dangerous, but what we did not have was adequate protective gear for the mission, but that's the responsibility of those who sent us there. Radiation is considered invisible. It cannot be seen, but you can feel it. That is, you can feel a certain metallic taste in your mouth and a sore throat. Radiation never passes without a trace, so the consequences are always there, and radiation usually hits precisely those parts of the body that are the most vulnerable. So for everyone who's gone through Chernobyl, there are consequences. I remember so well the first time we flew over Pripyat town. The whole town had been evacuated by then, but everything looked sort of surreal. Linen is hanging on laundry lines, on balconies, you see dropped bicycles, abandoned cars, no life around, all people gone, but their stuff is still there. When the catastrophe happened, there was the Soviet Union. We had 15 constituent republics playing their part in handling this mess. Today, no country in the world would be in a position to handle the problem of this magnitude if it happened again. In our number 4 spot today, we have the elephant's foot. The elephant's foot is a highly radioactive mass of corium that was formed during the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. It is named after its shape, which resembles that of an elephant's foot. The corium was formed when the reactor's core melted down, causing a mixture of melted nuclear fuel, concrete, and other materials to form into a highly radioactive mass. The elephant's foot is estimated to have had a temperature of around 2,700 degrees Celsius at the time of the accident and emitted lethal levels of radiation. The initial workers who tried to remove the elephant's foot from the reactor died within weeks due to the radiation exposure. Today, the elephant's foot remains extremely radioactive and is still inaccessible. It is estimated to be one of the most dangerous objects in the world, with exposure to it resulting in almost certain death within minutes. In our number 3 spot today, we have Kopachi. Kopachy was a village in Ukraine that was affected by the disaster. The village was situated close to the nuclear power plant, and its residents were exposed to high levels of radiation. To contain the spread of contamination, the Soviet government ordered the evacuation and burial of the village, including burying the contaminated soil under a layer of clean soil. Today, Kopachy remains abandoned and designated as a part of the exclusion zone around the Chernobyl plant. The village and surrounding area serve as a reminder of the devastating consequences of nuclear disasters and the importance of nuclear safety. In our number 2 spot today, we have the plant. It might come as a surprise, but the Chernobyl nuclear plant didn't just shut down entirely after the disaster. Despite the contamination and the risks associated, they continued to use the plant for years to come. Reactor 4, which exploded during the accident, was completely destroyed, and the other reactors were shut down over time. The Soviet government continued to use parts of the plant for several years to generate electricity and heat for the surrounding area, but eventually the plant was decommissioned. It wasn't until December of 2000 that the final reactor, Reactor 3, was shut down. Reactor 2 was shut down in 1991, and 1 was shut down in 1996. It is thought that the plant should be fully out of use by 2028. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the containment. After the disaster took place, the damaged reactor, Reactor number 4, was sealed in a heavy concrete sarcophagus that was meant to keep the radiation concealed and contained. While this may seem like a foolproof plan, there are many debates about how effective this containment actually is and how effective it may or may not continue to be. These are, of course, super important questions, and considering the fact that it's something we've never really had to deal with before in any way, how are we really supposed to know until we try? The building of a new structure called the New Safe Confinement Structure started in 2006, and it was completed in 2017. The new structure is 843 feet wide, 531 feet long, and 356 feet tall, and is meant to keep the reactor and its previous sarcophagus contained for at least the next 100 years. Despite that relatively short amount of time, experts say that the exclusion zone and surrounding area will remain uninhabitable for the next 20,000 years. Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have the reactor visit. This is a story that was told by a nuclear physicist from New York, Andrei Karsukov, and he told this story after he visited Chernobyl in 1997. During this visit, he went to the power station around 7:30 a.m. and he went into what was left of reactor number 4. This is where the explosion occurred. He began to take some radiation level readings, but suddenly he began to hear someone scream. He said, quote, "I ran upstairs to tell someone, but they said that when I entered the reactor control room, I was the first person to open that door in 3 years, and the only way to get inside the old reactor is through the doors I came in through. If someone had gone inside the reactor when I was not looking, they would have tripped an alarm that goes off when the reactor door is opened mechanically. The reactor door requires a password and a handprint, yet someone or something was inside." Later that evening, as we were eating dinner outside the building by the river next to the plant, a floodlight turned on in the room of the installation. There was no way anyone could be inside. As we ate, we figured there was a power surge or something. Then, just as my colleague said that, the light turned off. Maybe the reactor itself is now haunted by the souls who lost their lives as a result of the meltdown. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Chernobyl ghosts. While you can visit certain parts of Chernobyl today that have been deemed safe, taking a trip may not be for everyone, or perhaps it's too far, or whatever 100 reasons there are for not visiting the site. But with the technology we have now, there's another way you can visit the site, and that is through trusty old Google Maps. Many internet people have walked through the streets of the exclusion zone, searching around, seeing what photos Google Maps holds. But with those virtual tours comes something that is absolutely terrifying people, and that is the apparent sightings of what is referred to as the ghosts of Chernobyl. People have reported seeing shadowy figures, sometimes even faces, in the abandoned buildings left in the exclusion zone, and I have to admit, some of the screenshots I've seen are pretty terrifying. Do you believe these are real ghosts caught on camera, or is it just a legend like many of the other things on today's list? In our number 8 spot today, we have the blackbird. People in the district of the Ukraine that houses Chernobyl have told stories of sightings of the blackbird for years, and it is perhaps the most well-known legend that comes from the area. The blackbird is a human creature with wings and piercing red eyes, and it was apparently seen by workers at the Chernobyl plant on the fateful day of the nuclear disaster. disaster. After this, it was reported that anyone who had seen the bird would later report suffering from terrible nightmares and begin receiving threatening phone calls. Many of the people where the legend originates from, unfortunately, were at the center of the disaster and have since passed away from the radiation poisoning, so no one is sure if the blackbird really is out there or not. The blackbird is said to be a symbol of something terrible being afoot, so seeing it is definitely not a great thing to happen to a person. I think it's probably just another one to add to the list of reasons why maybe a Chernobyl visit isn't the best idea. I don't know, okay? It's for your health. In our number 7 spot today, we have the government cover-up. Of course, a disaster like this is going to get some government conspiracies swirling around it, and this little ditty suggests that the Chernobyl disaster was actually conducted by the Soviet government due to the failure of a new, at the time, huge missile defense radio structure called Duga-3. This structure, that actually exists in real life, is suspected of having been wildly over budget, and it was the source of many complaints after it was built. The systems were extremely powerful and broadcast in shortwave radio bands. They would appear without warning and sounded like a sharp, repetitive tapping noise, and they would disrupt things like legitimate broadcasts, amateur radio, commercial aviation communications, and utility transmissions, which all led to there being international complaints, and at the time, people didn't know what it was. This strange noise actually would go on to gain the tower the nickname Woodpecker for an idea of what the sound sounded like. Because of the fact that people didn't know where the sound was coming from, it led them to think that this signal was actually being used for things such as Soviet mind control or weather control experiments. So the story suggests that in order to eliminate it, the nearby Chernobyl facility was allowed to go into meltdown. It seems like they probably could have done something much less lethal and much less damaging, so I'm not exactly sure how true this one could possibly be, but there are definitely people out there who believe it. In our number 6 spot today, we have the spiders. The spiders that are residing within the exclusion zone are, of course, radioactive, but it's not only the spiders that are now dangerous to touch, it's also their webs. Spiders in Chernobyl are literally making radioactive webs, which is the stuff straight out of a comic book. These radioactive webs are also being woven in much different ways than they once were, which would suggest, of course, some sort of genetic mutation is at play. Spiders were already a creature I'd like to stay far away from. I feel just like tingly talking about them, but radioactive spiders adds a whole new level. Not only are the spiders now dangerous for non-radioactive animals to touch, but walking through their web is equally as dangerous to those who aren't thriving in the radiation. So not only do you have to watch out for regular old radioactive material, but now also get the never-ending construction of radioactive webs. That's amazing. It's so great. In our number 5 spot today, we have the alien invasion. Okay, it seems absolutely insane, but there is an alien conspiracy that actually revolves around Chernobyl, and there are people who believe it's true. There is part of this theory that I like, and that is because it basically suggests that aliens saved humanity. Yeah, in this story, they didn't cause disaster or try to steal our planet, and instead, they saved us from a complete and total meltdown. What happened, and how this all started, is that around the same time of the Chernobyl disaster, people reported spotting a number of UFOs. One witness even said that they saw a UFO for 6 hours. So basically, because of this uptick in sightings, people believe that the aliens came to help sort of diffuse some of the radiation levels that were seen after the disaster. This would have helped to prevent an even larger blast with an even higher amount of death and illness. This is sort of a conspiracy brought up to explain how, while this meltdown was of course catastrophic, it didn't leave like apocalyptic level damage, which believers of this theory said there should have been. So what do we think? Did aliens come to save the planet? In our number 4 spot today, we have The Musician. This is a story that comes from a Redditor named Jake, but this actually isn't Jake's story. This is the story of a man named Yuri who Jake met at a bar in Finland. Yuri is actually a Chernobyl survivor, and he had quite the harrowing tale to share with Jake. Yuri is a musician, and at the time of the disaster, he was in a state-sponsored musical dance troupe. Basically, as soon as the disaster happened, this group was called upon by the government to come in and calm the people living in the area. Yuri said, quote, "Mere hours after the meltdown commenced, our bus entered the exclusion zone at checkpoint Dityatki. We were told not anything, and the soldiers made it forbidden for speaking with the village people. Imagine not knowing a disaster taking place, yet seeing the strange workings of the radioactivity all around. Everyone was sick and dying, yet quarantined and not allowed to leave the zone. This is all chilling, but this is where the story takes a terrifying turn. He begins to describe their final performance, which was in Pripyat. The ballerina danced, knowing something horrible had happened, and she danced like never before, and she even let her hair down from her bun to just let it flow. Suddenly though, Yuri noticed that these locks of hair weren't just falling out of her bun, they were falling down to the ground. Basically, Yuri ends off his story by explaining his escape, which was through back roads and avoiding military checkpoints, and he ends off by saying that he is the only one of his group to survive. In our number 3 spot today, we have barn swallows. Any animal who lives in the exclusion zone has to have been affected by the disaster, and that includes those who spend most of their time in the sky. I'm obviously talking about birds. The barn swallows in Chernobyl are one animal who have seen a change in their physical appearance that has lasted all of the years since the nuclear meltdown. It is unclear why these birds have been affected greater than their land animal counterparts, or if these changes will ever reverse to their previous state, but here's what they are currently dealing with. The swallows appeared to have severely deformed beaks, disproportionate feathers, some had partial albinism, and they were seen to have had much smaller brains. Of course, some of these issues are much worse than others, and I'm sure these changes have significantly affected their ways of life, but of course, they continue to adapt as time goes on. It is sad that this human-made disaster has affected them in such a negative way, but the fact that they are still around really shows their adaptability and their resilience. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Chernobyl Zombies. This little legend that comes from within the exclusion zone claims that after the Chernobyl disaster, we of course know that unfortunately people lost their lives, but what happened if those who did then became the undead? We're obviously talking about zombies here. There are plenty of legends that suggest the exclusion zone isn't dangerous and off limits because of the toxic radiation, but actually because there are brain-eating zombies wandering the area. I mean, I personally have never received a lethal dose of radiation, so I cannot confirm nor deny that this would turn one into a zombie, but I'm gonna go ahead and call this one most likely fake. I mean, at least I am really hoping it is. We're dealing with enough as a society. We don't need zombies on the list. This little legend can most likely be attributed to a video game that takes place in the exclusion zone, but it certainly is not based on any real life facts, at least that we know of. Finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Stalkers. Speaking of that video game, which is called Stalker, it might have inspired the tales of the zombies, but it also apparently has inspired some to try and sneak into the exclusion zone themselves. This popular game set in the zone has made some people try and sneak into it themselves in real life in order to live out the game. You know, like a LARPing scenario, but the only enemy this time is radiation. Basically, there are these people who are now being referred to as stalkers, and they are said to be sort of romanticizing the exclusion zone. They like to sneak in, explore the ruins, sleep in the abandoned buildings, and sometimes even bring in a device to show them how much radiation they're being exposed to, which is pretty frightening. Despite these dangerous explorers sharing their nickname with the video game, however, the name actually comes from characters in the novel Roadside Picnic, which was turned into a classic Soviet film entitled Stalker, directed by Andrei Tarkovsky. The term stalker is meant to refer to thieves who sneak into places that are harboring lethal secrets. Some even tried to tempt fate even more by doing things like eating fruit that they found growing in the zone. Because of the fact that this place is meant to be off limits, many of those sneaking in here who consider themselves stalkers wear things like paramilitary gear, they wear gas masks, balaclavas, and other things to cover their face. All in all, it's very dangerous and also very unsettling.
Starting off this countdown, we have the residents. Believe it or not, but there are people that still live in Chernobyl, even though it's highly dangerous to do so. It's estimated that there are around 130 to 150 people currently living there. Many of them are older women. In fact, they have been given the name Chernobyl's babushkas. Now, you may be wondering, how do they live there when there's no operating grocery store and stuff like that? Well, they live off of the land. They are still farming their family's land. But the thing is, the water and soil there is still highly contaminated. So why would they take this risk? Well, one of the elderly ladies featured in a documentary about Chernobyl's babushkas said, and I quote, Radiation doesn't scare me, starvation does. After the nuclear disasters, these ladies fled their home, but over the years they have all come back. Despite there being no hospitals or grocery stores, they don't care. They just want to be on their homeland. And turns out their bodies have somewhat adjusted to the high levels of radiation there. In our 9th spot, we have the radioactive animals. And if you guys are liking this video so far, then make sure to give it a big thumbs up. The nuclear power plant explosion had a lasting effect on the animals in the area. First off, families had to flee their home and leave their pets behind. As a result, a number of stray dogs that are descendants of those dogs still roam the area. But it's not safe to pet them, no matter how cute they are. And sadly, because of their exposure to the radiation, they don't live a long life. And many of them have health issues. Another animal that is highly radioactive there are the boars. This is because they eat grubs, tubers, and roots in the soil where the radioactive isotopes have settled. Not only that, but birds and rodents have been found with tumors and cataracts, all from being exposed to the radiation in the area. Coming in at number 8, we have the creepy doll beds. There are a bunch of people who go around Chernobyl purposely trying to make it creepier. They have been given the name the disaster tourists. They have been known to take creepy old dolls and place them on windowsills or hang them from buildings, etc. They also did this really creepy thing in an abandoned school. They rearranged a kindergarten classroom and placed a doll on every single one of those dilapidated beds. That literally looks like something straight out of a horror movie. Seriously, out of all the abandoned places there, that one looks like it would for sure be haunted. In our 7th spot today, we have the ghostly figure. There are tons of ghosts that haunt Chernobyl. I mean, any place where a huge tragedy takes place is bound to be haunted. In this case, the ghost was captured on live TV. So Sci-Fi Channel's Destination Truth went to Chernobyl and conducted a number of paranormal investigations. They even went to Reactor 4. While there, they saw a human figure appear on a thermal imaging camera. They believe that that is the soul of a worker that died from the explosion. They also checked out a number of abandoned hospitals and saw multiple figures moving throughout the hospital on the thermal imaging camera as well. Isn't that spooky? Moving on to number 6, we have the elephant's foot. The elephant's foot is a large mass of black poria. It's given the name the elephant's foot because it's shaped sort of like an elephant's foot. Now, this thing is highly deadly. It emits high levels of radiation. Anyone exposed to it for minutes could die from radiation poisoning. And guess what? Although it's not as active as it was back in the day, it is still generating heat and still melting down into the base of Chernobyl. The scariest part, if it comes in contact with water, another explosion could occur. Now, eventually the elephant's foot will cool on its own, but even then it will still remain highly radioactive. And no one should ever go near it. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the raccoon dog. This is a really freaking weird animal found in Chernobyl. When people first saw it, they actually thought the radiation caused a dog and a raccoon to just fuse together. Basically, they are found all throughout the exclusion zone, and they are thriving there. It's crazy to see how they have adapted to live in a highly radioactive area. Now, these things are freaking cute. In fact, they are the most observed animals in that area by scientists. Coming in at number 4, we have the firebugs. These are tiny but deadly radioactive bugs. They were discovered back in 2011 when 2 friends were out collecting flowers in the exclusion zone. Don't worry, they were doing this for scientific reasons, you know, to study the pollen, not to just create a deadly radioactive bouquet of flowers. Anyways, while doing so, they came across these firebugs. They then went around collecting hundreds of these bugs, some from areas with higher levels of radiation and some from areas with lower radiation levels. In the end, they found that those exposed to higher levels of radiation had deformities. I mean, yeah, just as you suspected. Either way, you don't want those bad boys crawling on your skin for a number of reasons. In our 3rd spot today, we have the mutated wolves. The wolves from Chernobyl are another animal that are most commonly studied by scientists. In fact, some have been tagged with GPS collars to help track the levels of radioactivity there. Here's the thing. There was this whole scary legend going around that the wolves living there got mutated and were now highly aggressive and massive in size. There were stories being told of these massive wolves hunting down humans and attacking any and every animal. Turns out that this was false. But here's something interesting. Scientists believe that the wolves there have been mating with the dogs there. And in the end, they are creating these large dogs that look like wolves. It's pretty interesting. I want a wolf dog. Another interesting interesting thing is that research has shown that the radiation isn't really affecting them. In fact, the wolf population is thriving there. As a result, they have concluded that humans have a greater negative impact on animals' lives than radiation does. Isn't that insane? It is said that there are around 300 wolves living in the exclusion zone. But again, like all the animals mentioned on this list, they are highly radioactive and dangerous to get close to or even pet. Coming in at number 2, we have the tombs. This is one of the saddest things at Chernobyl. But basically, a number of individuals that got exposed to the radioactive materials and died had to be buried in basically a big concrete coffin. Let's take a look at a man named Vasily Ignatenko. On that day, he went to the roof of the power plant to extinguish the fires. Sadly, he was exposed to a lethal dose of radiation and passed away. He was only 25. Now, his body was still radioactive. So Vasily, along with 27 other firefighters, were buried under big amounts of zinc and concrete. They did this to protect the public from the radiation emitting from their bodies. They were buried all around the reactor. It's really sad that they didn't really get a proper burial. I mean, they couldn't. It was too dangerous to go near their bodies. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the blackbird of Chernobyl. According to some survivors of this accident, they claim that shortly before the nuclear plant meltdown, they all experienced nightmares. They also received threatening phone calls and had encountered a huge winged bird creature. Legend goes that these were all warning signs that the disaster was going to happen. The creature they saw was a large creature like a man with huge wings and red eyes. Some even claim they saw it over one of the reactors as it went through the meltdown. This creature has been given the name the blackbird of Chernobyl. So legend goes, if you were in Chernobyl and you see this creature, then something bad is going to happen.
Starting off this countdown, we have the sarcophagus. Basically, this is a massive steel and concrete structure that covers the Chernobyl power plant. It was designed to help contain the radiation. The construction of the structure lasted for 206 days, and those working on it had to work in shifts of no more than 7 minutes. Any more time spent near the reactors would have killed them. But still, they did sacrifice their lives building this because thousands of workers still died from exposure to the radiation. Those that survived got severely ill, and majority of them developed cancer. Nowadays, the sarcophagus is still there, but it's beginning to crumble. In 2019, they were in the process of dismantling it because it was going to collapse. So a new one is currently being installed. That's probably the scariest thing in Chernobyl because of how deadly the building it's containing is. Coming in at number 9, we have the gas masks. And if you guys are liking this video or want to see part 3, then smash that like button. Chernobyl already looks like the place where an apocalypse occurred. Buildings are completely abandoned, run down, and overgrown with nature. What doesn't help is the piles upon piles of gas masks scattered all throughout Chernobyl. This really adds to the eeriness of this place. And again, makes it look like a place where a zombie or alien takeover occurred. In fact, there is one room inside a school which is just completely filled with child-sized gas masks. It's very creepy, but also sad. Like, imagine how frightened the young children were when this happened. The gas masks found there are just a sad reminder of the horrors that took place there when the reactor exploded. Moving on to number 8, we have the rotting toys. Littered all throughout the city are toys or personal belongings people had to leave behind. The saddest thing to see are pictures of children's toys left behind. Like, I just think that was probably someone's favorite little dolly. Go anywhere there and you'll find items scattered everywhere, now broken and covered in filth. Like, imagine you're rushed out of your home and have to leave behind all your personal belongings. That must have been so hard. I can't imagine how everyone must have felt. It's really depressing to think about. Moving on at number 7, we have the examination chair. So this one is pretty strange, but somehow a gynecologist examination chair ended up in the middle of the woods outside of a hospital. Not only is that super weird, but it's also super creepy. It's all rusted and beat up and looks like an old torture device. Not only that, but that means someone had to go inside the abandoned hospital, find that chair, and then carry it all the way back down and into the woods. I got a lot of questions. Why would someone do this? And how long did it take them to do this? And again, why would someone do this? Either way, it makes for a very spooky encounter. Moving on, at number 6 we have the abandoned cooling tower. A partially constructed cooling tower can be found at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. They were built to evaporate the cooling water from the 2 new reactors. Sadly, they were never completed. Now, these things are massive. The diameter was over 120 meters and it stands at 150 meters tall. Obviously, after the accident, there was no need to continue on with the construction of this, so the government just left the towers there along with everything else. Eventually, over time, nature will have its way with it and it will start to erode and crumble. It's just crazy seeing all these abandoned infrastructures. Imagine how life would have been if that explosion never happened. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the toxic river. There's a river that's just filled with radioactive water right near the reactor. The scariest part is, despite how toxic the water is, a bunch of aquatic life live there. In particular, giant catfish. Yes, giant catfish. A video from 2016 shows a massive catfish swimming in the water. People originally were like, oh my god, what the heck is that? It must be some sort of mutated animal. Later, it was just found out to be a giant catfish. But still, what the heck? And it's the fact that they have adapted to be able to survive in that highly toxic water. Like, that just baffles me. Not only that, but they can thrive there because the water has no higher predators. Obviously though, you're not allowed to go fishing there. Okay, I feel like that's a given, but I also feel like people would still try it, so I'm just gonna say it. Don't go fishing there. In our 4th spot, we have the jarfish. Speaking of fish, we're gonna go with this. So back in 2016, photographer and journalist Miriam Wazer took a trip to explore the ruins of Chernobyl. While inside an abandoned building, she came across something very creepy and odd. She found a bunch of fish and other specimens in jars. Why someone was collecting fish, it just baffles many. And they weren't even like proper beakers or science mason jars. No, it looked like someone emptied out their jar of pickles and then used it to store the specimen. I think it's best if those remain untouched. Like, can you imagine how stinky they would be if they were open nowadays? They would reek. Old stinky fish is not something I would ever want to handle. Now, the other specimen beside the fish are unknown. No one knows what the heck they are. But if you know, let me know in the comments below. Coming in at number 3, we have the abandoned hospitals. The hospitals at Chernobyl are quite eerie. They're just filled with rusted, empty hospital beds, littered syringes, and more. The walls and floors are cracking, and there's dirt and questionable red marks on the floor. I think the saddest thing though is that these hospitals are often trashed with medical supplies just tossed everywhere. The days after the explosion happened, people were frantically rushing to hospitals. Hospital staff were overwhelmed by the amount of people there. This moment is still preserved in the hospitals to this day. It's pretty dark once you think about it. And at number 2 today, we have the Sad Alley. The Sad Alley, or the Alley of Memory, is an alley in the Ukraine created in memory of the villages and residents who had to flee from their homes during the disaster. Basically, it's a walkway with signs lining the sides. These signs are names of cities and villages that had to evacuate and leave everything behind. It's a way to ensure we just never forget the impact that this disaster had. It's really sad. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the radioactive spiders. Yes, you heard me correctly. Imagine if Peter Parker got bit by one of these bad guys. He'd be like a weirdly mutated Spider-Man or something like that. But anyways, the spiders in the exclusion zone are radioactive. So you definitely don't want to be bit by one. Oh wait, it gets worse. They also make radioactive webs. Yeah, you heard me, that's a thing. So you don't have to just worry about these spiders, but you have to worry about walking through their deadly webs. Like, what the heck? No thank you. Nuh-uh. I'm not a fan of spiders, but imagine radioactive ones. That sounds like it belongs in a horror movie. Radioactive, radioactive.
Starting us off at number 10 is an abandoned carnival. Now, I have always known carnivals to be very upbeat and happy places, but I think it's safe to say after toxic radiation, they ain't so fun. Just a mile and a quarter away from the Chernobyl power plant is the small town of Pripyat. Pripyat was the town where most workers at Chernobyl lived and raised their families prior to the famous blast. Obviously, that is not the case anymore. What is now left of this once popular carnival is a decaying Ferris wheel, bumper cars surrounded by overgrown vines, and an old rusty skeleton of a merry-go-round. It is said that the amusement park was set to open on May 1st, just 5 days after the Chernobyl incident occurred, but the people of Pripyat needed something to do while the reactor was melting down, so the town opened up the amusement park on April 27th. How charming. Nothing more sweet and fun than you and your family enjoying a beautiful Ferris wheel ride that sweeps in and out of toxic radiation. It's the little things in life.
In our 9th spot today, we have the ghosts. A number of people lost their lives over this terrible disaster, and it's believed that their souls are still around, haunting Pripyat. This one story in particular will give you the chills. It was told by nuclear physicist Andrei Karsukov. He visited the area in 1997 and claims he encountered a ghost. So when he arrived, he went to the power station and went to the number 4 reactor. That's where the explosion occurred. Now, he was there taking radiation readings when all of a sudden he heard someone screaming for rescue from a fire coming from inside. He said that it was impossible for someone to be inside of the old reactor room. For starters, the door requires a password and a handprint. And not only that, it would have tripped an alarm if someone managed to get inside. Yet, the screaming was clearly coming from inside. It sounded like someone was desperately trying to escape. So he might have heard the ghostly cries from someone who lost their life in the power plant explosion. Isn't that scary? I think so.
Number 8, silhouettes of missing townspeople. Before I go any further on this one, let me just say that these silhouettes are not actually of real people left after the blast. A couple of sneaky and daring graffiti artists said to be from Germany and Belarus snuck into the radiation zone and thought it would be a good idea to spray paint silhouettes of people who once lived in this beautiful little community. So these pieces more or less resemble what once was rather than resembling actual humans from the town. That being said, there are some unique silhouettes through the radiation zone, such as a little girl with pigtails reaching for a light switch in a random abandoned room. Somewhere outside, a boy pulling a truck towards a corner of the building, as well as silhouettes of random people dancing, and to finish it off, a small group of children jumping together in terror of the blast. Pretty morbid, if you ask me. Whether these silhouettes are based on specific real people or not, these random silhouettes are definitely a haunting thing to see, and I don't want to see them.
Coming in at number 7, we have the Bloody Red. The Bloody Red, or the Red Forest, is the name given to the forest area around Chernobyl. Why is it called that? Well, this area received a lot of radiation fallout. As a result, the trees turned this bright orange color and then died. Nowadays, not a single tree can grow there anymore. In fact, this area is considered the most radioactive land area on the planet. Yes, on the planet. Obviously, as a result, the 400 hectares of land are off limits. It's strictly prohibited to go in there. I mean, duh, unless you have a death wish and want to die from exposure to radiation. What's also scary is that in 2015, a fire broke out in the forest, and even more radioactive material was released from this burning. So yeah, that forest is a big no-go zone. Also, could they have given it a creepier name, like the Bloody Red? Really? Really?
Coming in at number 6 are piles of creepy dolls. Creepy dolls! I have seen plenty of horror films in my time, and nothing creeps me out more than a creepy, probably possessed old doll. All through Pripyat, piles of dolls and doll heads can be seen in the randomest of places. Everywhere from windowsills, piles of debris, bed frames, tree branches, literally everywhere. Now, some of these dolls may be left over from the blast, but odds are they are all placed there by cheeky horror fans wanting to place their own touch on the Chernobyl site. Some of these are even propped up in specific poses with gas masks on. Annabelle, if you're watching this, you stay in your glass box. You got that?
We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the Hospital of Death. This is said to be the deadliest hospital on the planet. So after the nuclear disaster, this hospital began quickly filling up with a number of sick and injured citizens. Nowadays though, obviously the hospital is abandoned. But the basement of the hospital contains a dark secret. In the basement, there are piles of first responders' clothing. These clothings belong to the first responders like the firemen who were on the scene immediately after the explosion. Obviously, the clothing they wore when they rushed into the building is now highly contaminated, and still to this day emit dangerously high levels of radiation. So they were just dumped in the basement because they didn't know where else to get rid of it. In fact, the radiation in this building is 4,000 times higher than normal. It's crazy.
Number 4, radiation-eating fungus. In the words of Jeff Goldblum, life finds a way. Currently, there is a fungus growing inside the damaged 4th reactor of Chernobyl where radiation levels are still insanely high. Discovered by scientists back in 2002, this fungus, when tested, showed that when exposed to higher ionizing radiation, it would actually grow faster. What happened to the tested fungus after? Who knows? Either way, I do wish I could have been there to test it with the other scientists because I hear they were some pretty fun guys. I'll show myself out.
And our third spot today, we have the mutated animals. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster had devastating, lasting effects. The nuclear material leaked into the soil, contaminating food and water. In fact, the radioactive materials leaked into pastures and was eaten by cows, and then was later found in their milk that children were drinking. But let's talk more about these farm animals that were affected. There were tons of weird mutated animals born near the disaster zone after this incident. Pigs, goats, and horses were born with messed up faces and extra limbs, or were just weird colors. Nowadays, there's a lot of stray dogs that roam the area. Sadly, because of their exposure to the radiation, they don't live a long life, and they may have a number of health issues.
Coming in at number 2 is quite possibly the strangest but most obvious thing you will find in all of Chernobyl. Tourists! Apparently, around 12,000 tourists visit the exclusion zone every single year. One tourism company promises 11 hours of excitement with a respirator and a dosimeter included. There are even some nearby hotels that request you leave your radioactive shoes outside and don't bring them into the hotel with you once you return. No matter how safe or unsafe you think it is to visit the exclusion zone, quite obviously thousands of people from around the world go and visit every single year. Honestly, it does seem kind of cool, and I'm sure there's a gift shop somewhere that sells shirts that say, I went all the way to Chernobyl and all I got was this shirt and an extra thumb. I'd buy that. Hey Lizzie, you want to go to Chernobyl with me?
No.
Okay.
And in our number 1 spot today, we have the stalkers. This is absolutely insane. I don't think you guys are ready for this one. But the Stalkers is the name given to a group of Russians and Ukrainians that romanticize the apocalyptic environment of Pripyat. They sneak into abandoned buildings and explore them. Sometimes they even sleep over there. Also, to make matters weirder, they bring a gauger counter to see how much radiation they were exposed to on their journeys. Not only that, but apparently they also like to eat the fruit that grows in the danger zone. Like, this is their definition of fun, and they just love it. I highly recommend you don't do this, for a number of obvious reasons. But like I said, the stalkers love this.
Starting us off at number 10, we have the beautiful red fox. Since the devastating events of the Chernobyl explosion back in 1986, the exclusion zone has pretty much become a ghost town. But only for humans. As far as wildlife is concerned, this place is booming like Vegas on a Friday night. One of the most often seen animals there is the highly adaptable red fox. Red foxes are known to thrive in many different kinds of environments, from urban and rural areas from Canada all the way to Australia, and Chernobyl is no exception. The red fox is not exactly accustomed to humans, especially near Chernobyl, so most of these foxes are not actually scared of the tourists that do explore the exclusion zone every year. Many visitors report that these foxes actually approach them hoping for a little treat. Now, how sweet is that? In a previous video, I don't hold back my fear of the piles of old dolls that also inhabit Chernobyl, but if I have the chance to get close to a red fox and maybe become best friends with it, I might just have to go. But what's actually weird about it? Well, there's nothing that will stick out more in a 35-year-old ghost town of one of the biggest radiation blasts ever than a beautiful red fox. The dolls make sense to me. The foxes, they need to relocate to my backyard where I can feed them and love them forever because crikey, I love wildlife. At number 9, we have elk. Back in 2018, tourists spotted this large creature in a water tank at Chernobyl. And no, it wasn't a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. It was a poor, stranded, full-size elk. As far as its age and its ninja skills, that is unknown. This large and beautiful creature somehow fell into the water tanks between the 5th and the 6th reactors and was reportedly stuck in the radioactive water for 3 days. Tourists called the local fire department to come and help save the poor animal. One firefighter tethered a rope to its antlers so that while being towed by the boat back to safety, the animal could keep its head above water. The entire rescue took about an hour before the elk was brought up onto the bank, where it then rested for about 4 hours before finally making its way back to the forest for some much needed R&R. No one quite knows how it got in the tank, but many believe it was running away from wolves or some other type of predator and accidentally fell into the tank after. A local radiation expert, Denis Vizhnevitsky, said the radiation dose it had would not be fatal. The elk will survive in spite of taking a big radiation dose. If you ask me, this sounds like the birth of a superhero, you know? Like the wolves chase the elk falls into a radioactive river, it resubmerges with radioactive superpowers, and then it seeks out its revenge on the wolves? Come on, it writes itself. Joking aside, bless the hearts of everyone involved saving that poor animal. But I would be on the lookout for a mutated elk out there, because after swimming in radioactive water for 3 days, dang, that's gotta do something. At number 8, we have the cousin of the radioactive elk, the radioactive deer. Back in 1986, during the Chernobyl blast, most of Western Russia and Europe was blanketed by a toxic cloud. That toxic cloud reached all the way out to Norway and impacted the wildlife there almost as much as it did in the Ukraine. In central and southern Norway, the migratory reindeer often feed on lichen and fungus, two foods of the reindeer that were exposed to large amounts of radiation from that toxic cloud. These reindeer now contain higher levels of radioactivity that are beyond the European Union limit for consumption, which is a huge problem for the indigenous people of the area, known as the Sami. The Sami heavily rely on the reindeer for being one of their best sources of food, and yet for the first time ever, they're being told it is not safe to eat some of these animals. Just days after the blast in 1986, the government tested the radiation in the reindeer and measured anywhere between 30,000 to 60,000 becquerel per kilogram. This forced authorities to raise the limit of acceptable radiation found in animals from 600 becquerel per kilogram to 3,000, so the Sami still had enough food sources to sustain them. Lavrent Skutterud, an environmental radiation expert of the Norway Radiation Protection Authority, says it is important to remember that the permissible levels are not toxic limits. The limits are instead intended to minimize the amount of radiated food people consume every year, generally trying to keep it below 80,000 a year. The levels of radiation have fallen over the years, and there are still spikes from time to time. While these reindeer were studied in Norway and not exactly Chernobyl, deer are abundant in the exclusion zone and are known to migrate far distances. So, from Chernobyl all the way to Norway, you can find large numbers of radioactive deer. That sounds weird. Coming in at number 7, we have brightly colored birds. That's right, bright colored little birds. Creepy. Am I right? Now, okay, I know this one is a little vague, but let me tell you why it's specifically these birds. Professor Timothy Mousseau and Dr. Anders Moeller studied 1,570 birds in the forests and surrounding areas of Chernobyl. They found that the populations of birds that were colored red, orange, and yellow, such as the yellowhammer, have decreased more than those of larger and less vibrant colors. The reason being? Antioxidants and carotenoids. Birds that produce carotenoids have brighter colors. Producing those bright colors, laying large eggs, and migrating large distances uses up a large amount of antioxidants in the bird's body, making them more susceptible to higher levels of radiation and decreasing their populations. Among the species that were most impacted are orioles, blackbirds, quails, hoopoes, and robins. I was really hoping the radiation was the reason these birds were bright colored, and that maybe there was a tie-dye oriole out there or something, but I'm afraid I'm out of luck. Staying with the bird theme, coming in at number 6 is the white-tailed eagle. Unlike the small, colorful, radioactive birds, the endangered white-tailed eagle is thriving in the Ukraine. University of Georgia researchers completed a month-long camera study laying dead fish carcasses near the riverbeds of the exclusion zone to see what kinds and how many different predator species would come and feed off the dead fish. James Beasley of Savannah River Ecology Laboratory said, "We've seen evidence of a diversity of wildlife in the CEZ through our previous research, but this is the first time that we've seen white-tailed eagles, American mink, and river otter on our cameras. Imagine watching an endangered species come flocking back in large numbers to feed in only one area. Hey, maybe radioactive fish just tastes a bit better. As much as I love seafood though, I think I'm just gonna leave it for the eagles. Coming in at our halfway point, number 5, we have the European brown bear. Reported back in 2014 for the first time in 100 years, a brown bear was seen in the exclusion zone of Chernobyl. A Ukrainian collaborator for the Transfer Exposure Effects Research Program by the name of Sergei Gaschek set up cameras hoping to learn more about the effects of the radioactivity in the area when all of a sudden one night on camera, a brown bear decided to make its big entrance back into Chernobyl. Brown bears are not the first large mammal to be seen in the exclusion zone, but it is definitely something to celebrate after a brown bear pieces out of there 100 years ago. Project leader Mike Woods from the University of Salford reported that we are basically working on the assumption that as you move people out of the equation and human pressure and disturbance is removed, then any animals that have a corridor into the exclusion zone find they are suddenly away from the pressures and dangers presented by people. So basically, this radioactive ghost town is a heaven on earth for all of our large furry friends. But hey, as long as you got the bare necessities, who cares what it looks like? I wonder if our buddy Bigfoot ever vacations there. At number 4, going down in size from the European brown bear, we have firebugs. Little radioactive bugs who spontaneously combust and fly around the Ukraine terrorizing people. It's mayhem! Just kidding. Sadly, it's not as cool as that. Sorry. Back in April of 2011, our good friends Anders Moeller and Timothy Mousseau were collecting flowers in the famous Red Forest to study their pollen when they came across these little firebugs. They collected a few hundred of these little bugs and compared the markings on bugs from places of higher radiation to those of places of lower radiation. The result? Firebugs from higher radiation spots tended to have missing or deformed markings on them, such as missing dots or eyes, as some others call them. There you have it. What happens when a bug becomes radioactive? It loses a spot. Wow. Starting us off in our top 3 is arguably the most intelligent mammal on Earth. Humans! That's right, we are technically animals, and you can find humans in the exclusion zone almost every day of the year. In one of my previous videos, I told you all that there are actual tours to the Chernobyl site, and around 12,000 tourists visit the site every year. That's 32.8767123 people a day, because that makes sense. From 2014 to 2018, Meredith Yeager, the team leader of the US National Cancer Institute, sequenced the genomes of 130 children that were conceived after the 1986 disaster. They looked at children born from 1987 to 2002, as well as the genomes of the children's parents with at least one of the parents being exposed to and within 45 miles of the 1986 blast. While the tests proved that the children of Chernobyl survivors and witnesses didn't carry more genetic mutations, some of those originally exposed did develop thyroid cancers. Studies found that more radiation exposed and the younger the person was increased the chances of developing the cancer. But of course, nowadays radioactive levels are much lower and measurements are taken with a dosimeter every single day to verify the safety for human exploration. So, if you want to go to Chernobyl or already have been, please let me know what it was like down in the comments. Coming in at number 2 is a real weird one. A giant catfish. Seriously. Over in Chernobyl's cooling pond, giant catfish can be seen swimming and even the odd time caught by adventurous fishermen. Back in 2016, a video surfaced of the massive aquatic animal in Chernobyl's cooling pond, and sure enough, many people thought it to be some kind of mutated monster fish. But whether we wish it was or not, radiation is not the reason for its massive size. The Wells catfish is a species known to reach gargantuan size. Some of these fish can reach up to 800 pounds, but are extremely rare due to the fact that most of the time they are mistaken for beluga sturgeon, or just exaggerated. It is entirely possible for these creatures to reach up to 350 pounds though, and that is still a massive fish to me. Italian fisherman Dino Ferrari caught one back in May of 2016, and this thing looks crazy. In the cooling ponds of Chernobyl, there is no real competition or higher predators of this giant fish, so it has more than enough food available to keep them packing on those gains and stay well fed. I never thought I would say this, but I think I'm scared of a catfish. Finally, coming in at our number 1 spot is definitely the weirdest animal on there. It's the raccoon dog. These half raccoon, half dog looking animals are a topic of controversy with some authorities, arguing if it is a member of the dog family or a member of the raccoon family, or the much more scientific name for it, part of the Procyanid family. Yeah, raccoon sounds better. These crazy interesting animals are native to Eastern Asia as well as quite common in the exclusion zone of Chernobyl. Once again, this is not a really cool radioactive combination of a raccoon and a dog, but just another animal that isn't exactly sure which family it is a part of. In a study completed by the ecologist James Beasley, it was discovered that raccoon dogs were just one of the many species of mammals that are thriving in the exclusion zone. He even got his picture taken with one, and I gotta say, it's so fluffy! For the longest time, I really wanted to get a dog, and I didn't care what breed it was, but now, I think I want a raccoon dog.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have cows. Cows are one of the sweetest and cutest animals out there, and it totally makes sense why people call them grass puppies. The area around Chernobyl was known for its agriculture before the disaster, so of course that means there were definitely a lot of cows that could be found. Since farm animals are not only expensive but can also be used as a source of income, many people took their farm animals with them, but many of these animals had already been exposed to the radiation in some capacity, and while it didn't affect them right away, the newer generations saw much more of the effects. In 1989, many farmers began reporting birth defects in their animals, some being much more severe than others. As time went on, the cows became less mutated, but that doesn't mean the effects went away. As the cows continued to graze on feed that was contaminated, the effects became more internal. This has led completely normal looking cows near the exclusion zone to begin producing milk that is toxic and not fit for consumption. This is just one of the clear examples of how, even though the visible effects may have worn off, there are still lasting effects that we probably hadn't previously considered. In our number 9 spot today, we have barn swallows. Any animal who lives in the exclusion zone have been affected by the disaster, and that includes those who spend most of their time in the sky. I'm obviously talking about birds. The barn swallows in Chernobyl are one animal who have seen a change in their physical appearance that has lasted all of the years since the nuclear meltdown. It is unclear why these birds have been affected greater than their land animal counterparts, or if these changes will ever reverse to their previous state, but here's what they are currently dealing with. The swallows appeared to have severely deformed beaks, disproportionate feathers, some had partial albinism, and they were seen to have much smaller brains. Of course, some of these issues are much worse than others, and I'm sure these changes have significantly affected their ways of life, but of course they continue to adapt as time goes on. It is sad that this human-made disaster has affected them in such a negative way, but the fact that they are still around really shows their adaptability and resilience. In our number 8 spot today, we have boars. Boars are often seen wandering around the exclusion zone, but they also make their way into the surrounding towns as well, which is creating quite a problem. Boars are a fairly common food source, and it's not unusual to come across one, but here's the problem if you live in the area: how are you supposed to tell which boars are radioactive and which aren't? Basically, you can't until it's too late. The boars who aren't radioactive might come across and intermingle with one who is, but they also like to eat mushrooms, and if they're searching for their food within the exclusion zone, it's a highly likely possibility that they'll find themselves eating a radioactive mushroom. This is posing quite a problem. In 2017, there was a study that found that approximately 1 out of every 3 boars that were killed in the nearby areas of Germany, which for the record isn't even that close to Chernobyl, have been found to be radioactive and super unsafe for human consumption. You'd think that being that far away would make you safe, but as we clearly now know, the effects of the disaster stretched far and wide. In our number 7 spot today, we have Przewalski's horse. These horses first originated in Mongolia and were wild horses that became endangered. They first became endangered due to hunters who would often kill the stallion, which of course would provide many difficulties in terms of reproduction. These horses weren't doing well in captivity, which made things even more difficult. This, combined with the harsh winters which would often claim their lives, left things looking quite grim for this species. In the late 1990s, however, in an effort to help repopulate these animals, 30 of them were released into the Ukrainian side of the exclusion zone, and it is believed that some of these original horses are actually still alive today, which is amazing, but camera trap images have also shown young horses, which means that they are repopulating, which is a huge win. Their expanding population in such a harsh environment could mean that they might potentially be able to return from the brink and go on to continue as a species, which is something we always want to see. In our number 6 spot today, we have cats. In the rush of the evacuation, many pets were left behind in Chernobyl, and that of course includes cats. With little to do and of course more kittens being born, this paved the way for a group of feral cats to take over the exclusion zone. These cats wander in and out of the zone and find all of their favorite snacks, such as radioactive rodents or the less common radioactive insects. These cats certainly have had quite a difficult time surviving, as they are a perfect tasty snack for much larger predators and are certainly not equipped to deal with the harsh winters, but even still, there is said to be at least 100 stray cats living in the exclusion zone. There are efforts underway to have the uncontaminated ones put up for adoption, but the difficulty is in testing them and also re-domesticating these animals who have had to fend for themselves for so long. In our number 5 spot today, we have dogs. Since we just talked about the cats who were sadly left behind, it's only fair we talk about the dogs too. It's strange that these two domesticated animals would have such different experiences after the disaster, disaster, but they absolutely have. There are far more dogs who have managed to survive throughout the years than cats, but that is most likely due to the fact that they aren't as easy to catch and eat as prey as cats are. But dogs have a whole other challenge, and that is they have a hard time hunting and feeding themselves. There are workers who continue to work the dangerous job at the plant, and they continually feed the dogs living in the zone, which is something that truthfully is so nice to hear. It is also said that there are dogs living in this area that have begun mating with wolves, which is only going to breed dogs that will be more likely to be able to survive on their own, which I suppose is a good thing. Similar to the cats, many of the stray dogs are being studied to see if they can be adopted into homes outside of the zone so that they don't have to continue living in these harsh environments that they really were not bred for. In our number 4 spot today we have European grey wolves. One of the species of animals that has been thriving ever since the disastrous nuclear meltdown has been the European grey wolf. Due to the lack of humans in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, they have been able to thrive, and it has been said that the wolves in this area actually have a population that is 7 times higher than that of comparable sites. Researchers are still trying to figure out exactly why this is happening, but it has obviously shown them that despite the effects of radiation in humans, the radiation clearly isn't affecting the wildlife's ability to reproduce. So this seems like just a regular grey wolf, but here's where things get a little different. Just because the wolves seem to be doing fine doesn't mean they aren't radioactive. These wolves, since they're such a high population, are beginning to travel farther and spread out more, which creates quite a problem. Not that we're just going up and petting wolves, but if you did come in contact with one of these wolves, you'd be getting a high dose of radiation just by touching them. Touching a carcass of these wolves with bare hands is absolutely not recommended. So while it is absolutely incredible to see the wildlife doing so well in this zone, we are now faced with an entirely different issue that we haven't really ever had before. In our number 3 spot today we have the Eurasian lynx. This one is on this list for a different reason than most. It isn't because of anything this animal is or isn't doing, but instead is due to the fact that this animal was once believed to have entirely disappeared from Europe. It was fairly recently in 2014 that researchers realized they had made a comeback in a big way. Similar to most of the animals we've talked about today, the Eurasian lynx has been able to thrive due to the lack of human population and interference. Their downfall was attributed to urbanization as well as hunters, and they were mostly wiped out in the early 20th century, although they remained in certain parts of Siberia. There is still a lot more research that needs to be done about these creatures to determine exactly how radioactive they are, and this will take time due to the dangers of the zone they reside in, as well as the nature of these creatures in general. But just being able to see that an animal that was struggling has been able to make such a comeback is probably one of the best things to come out of such a horrible disaster. In our number 2 spot today we have bison. Bison are right up there with wolves for most dangerous radioactive animal, and that is due to their size as well as the fact that they are a source of food for some. These huge animals can weigh up to 2,200 pounds and are certainly not an animal that is easily messed with. Many bison weren't affected by the radiation immediately, and instead it became much more of an issue once they started eating food that had been contaminated. They like to feed on grass, and a lot of it, and the radiation didn't only affect animal life but plant life as well, making their food source a literal feeding ground for radioactive material. Similar to the wolves we talked about before, running into these guys isn't only a threat now because of their size, but now because if you get too close, you could be facing some unsafe levels of radiation. In our number 1 spot today we have spiders. I've talked about my hatred for spiders a lot on this channel, but to be honest, they keep doing cool things, so I have to keep talking about them. Okay, well maybe this one is less cool and more scary, but still, they deserved a spot. Spiders that are residing within the exclusion zone are of course radioactive, but it's not only the spiders that are now dangerous to touch, but it is also their webs. Spiders in Chernobyl are literally making radioactive webs, which is the stuff straight out of a comic book. These radioactive webs are also being woven in much different ways than they were before, which would suggest some sort of genetic mutation at play. Spiders were already a creature I'd like to stay far, far away from, but radioactive spiders really adds a whole other level. Not only are the spiders now dangerous for non-radioactive animals to touch, but walking through their web is equally as dangerous to those who aren't thriving in the radiation. So not only do you have to watch out for the regular old radioactive material, but now also the never-ending construction of radioactive webs. Great. Starting off in our number 10 spot we have Chernobyl ghosts. While you can visit certain parts of Chernobyl today that have been deemed safe, taking a trip may not be for everyone, or perhaps it's too far, or whatever 100 reasons there are for not wanting to visit the site. But with the technology technology we have now, there's another way you can visit the site, and that is through trusty old Google Maps. Many internet people have walked through the streets of the exclusion zone searching around, seeing what photos Google Maps holds, but with those virtual tours comes something that is absolutely terrifying people, and that is the apparent sighting of what is referred to as the ghosts of Chernobyl. Many people have reported seeing shadowy figures and sometimes even faces in the abandoned buildings left in the exclusion zone, and I have to admit, some of the screenshots I've seen are pretty terrifying. Do you believe that these are real ghosts caught on camera, or is it just a legend like many of the other things that we have on today's list? In our number 9 spot today, we have animal mutations. There's no doubt that the Chernobyl nuclear disaster had devastating effects on all of the life in the area surrounding this meltdown. I think that's something most of us can agree on, and while most of the human life has moved out of the area, there is a lot of wildlife that remains, and those animals have taken over the exclusion zone. While scientists often observe and test these animals, it is clear that they are all contaminated in radiation and thus have mutated in certain ways, but despite the rumors, there are in fact no three-headed cows wandering around. I think this might be one of the most popular legends floating around in terms of the Chernobyl disaster, the story that there are just full-on monsters living within the exclusion zone, or that the meltdown happened because of a failed radiation experiment on these animals. There are tons of swirling rumors regarding the animals, but in the end the effects of the radiation is seen much more in things like their ability to reproduce, or them not being fit for consumption, rather than in things like extra limbs and heads and eyes. In our number 8 spot today, we have the government cover-up Part 1. Of course, a disaster like this is going to get some government conspiracies swirling around, and we've got a few of them to talk about today, so let's start off now with the first one. This little ditty suggests that the Chernobyl disaster was actually conducted by the Soviet government due to the failure of a new, at the time, huge missile defense radio structure called Duga-3. This structure, that actually exists in real life, is suspected of having been wildly over budget, and it was the source of many complaints after it was built. The systems were extremely powerful and broadcast in short-wave radio bands. They would appear without warning and sounded like a sharp, repetitive tapping noise, and they would disrupt things like legitimate broadcasts, amateur radio, commercial aviation communications, and utility transmissions, which all led to there being international complaints, and at the time, people didn't know what this structure was or what the sound was. This led people to think that the signal was actually being used for things such as Soviet mind control or weather control experiments. So this story suggests that in order to eliminate it, the nearby Chernobyl facility was allowed to go into meltdown. It seems like they probably could have done something much less lethal and much less damaging, so I'm not exactly sure how true this one could possibly be, but I do suppose that this is a list of urban legends. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Chernobyl Zombies. This little legend can most likely be attributed to a video game that takes place in the exclusion zone, but it is certainly not based on any real-life facts, at least that we all know of. This little legend claims that after the Chernobyl disaster, we of course know that unfortunately people lost their lives, but what happens if those who did then became the undead? Yep, we're obviously talking about zombies here. There are plenty of legends that suggest the exclusion zone isn't dangerous and off limits because of toxic radiation, but actually because there are brain-eating zombies wandering the area. I mean, I personally have never received a lethal dose of radiation, so I cannot confirm or deny that this would turn one into a zombie, but I'm just gonna go ahead and call this one out for being fake. I mean, at least I'm really hoping it is. We've dealt with enough in the last year and a half. We really don't need to add radiation zombies onto the list. In our number 6 spot today, we have It Never Happened. Okay, this is probably the easiest one to disprove, but perhaps it's not. This legend suggests that the whole disaster never actually happened and that the entire thing is just conspiracy. I don't know why anyone would do that, but hey, this is just a legend after all. There would be so many hoops to have to jump through in order to pull off that level of a stunt and keep it up for this long. Like, let's be honest, there are too many people involved for all of them to have been able to all keep the secret for this long. There's just no way everyone could keep their mouths shut. And what about the people who passed away from the event? I just have a lot of questions about this one. There are some weird legends on this list, but I do have to say that this one might be the least believable, and we just just talked about zombies. Unfortunately, it seems as though the Chernobyl nuclear disaster was a very real thing that happened, and it affected a ton of people. It was certainly an event that changed the world and made us all a lot smarter when it comes to nuclear safety. I hope. In our number 5 spot today, we have this super secret laboratory. This legend suggests that the Chernobyl disaster was a planned event that took place for a specific reason. You may be wondering what this apparent plan is, and that would be the plan to build a super secret laboratory. I mean, think about it. You want to build a super secret place, just cause the entire place to be so terribly contaminated in radiation that no one will want to search the area. Or those who do might even meet an untimely fate. It certainly is an evil plan, but it could potentially be quite effective. I don't think that this is the case at all, and I don't think Chernobyl was a planned event in order to build a secret lab, but I do agree that whoever originated this legend has quite an imagination. What do you think this lab would contain if this were true? Like an Area 51 type thing? Aliens and mermaids? Or perhaps that's where they're hiding all the three-eyed animals everyone keeps talking about. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Chernobyl illness. This is one of the more malicious stories on this list, which I do not like at all. People who lived in the region of the disaster had a huge impact on their day-to-day lives, and a lot of people had long-lasting health impacts from the entire thing. This disaster has been linked to terrible things like an increase in thyroid cancer as well as other forms of cancer, so when fake stories of a fake disease began circulating around, it was honestly super messed up. One of these fake illnesses coincided with the height of panic, misinformation, and ignorance surrounding HIV, and thus the totally made-up condition of Chernobyl HIV was born. This made-up disease was the source of many a whispered warning against friendship or relationships with those who had survived the disaster. Like, these people just survived the worst nuclear accident in history and now they have to worry about harmful schoolyard gossip? Yeah, no thanks. Despite its terrible origins, people still spread rumors and fear-mongered, and it truly is a cruel, entirely made-up story. In our number 3 spot today, we have Government Cover-Up Part 2. After the release of the incredible HBO show Chernobyl, which you haven't seen it, it is a must-watch. Like, it is such a good show. I watched it with Che, if you remember that guy, and it was just unreal. Anyway, after the show's release, the Russian government released a statement saying that the show was actually anti-Soviet Union propaganda and that they would be releasing their own Chernobyl show, which would detail how the CIA was actually the cause for the disaster. Rumor has it that the CIA sabotaged something which caused the reactor to melt down, and the whole thing was actually America's fault. I have no way of either proving or disproving this theory or legend, but I think it's probably safe to say that someone here isn't telling the truth. And it's not like it's a new thing that Russia and the US aren't exactly getting along. Maybe it's all just propaganda, or maybe there's some truth? I don't know. What do you guys think? In our number 2 spot today, we have the Blackbird. People in the district of the Ukraine that houses Chernobyl have told stories of sightings of the Blackbird for years, and it is perhaps the most well-known legend that comes from the area. The Blackbird is a human creature with wings and piercing red eyes, and it was apparently seen by workers at the Chernobyl plant on the fateful day of the nuclear disaster. After this, it was reported that anyone who had seen the bird would later report suffering from terrible nightmares and begin receiving threatening phone calls. Many of the people where the legend originates from unfortunately were at the center of the disaster and have since passed away from radiation poisoning, so no one is sure if the Blackbird really is out there or not. The Blackbird is said to be a symbol of something terrible being afoot, so seeing it is definitely not a great thing to happen to a person. I think it's probably just another one to add to the list of reasons why maybe a Chernobyl visit isn't the best idea. In our number 1 spot today, we have alien cleanup. There's always gotta be an alien story to keep things interesting and to add to the list of questions we have for extraterrestrials when we hopefully eventually find them, and Chernobyl is no different. Rather than the aliens causing the disaster, which might be where your mind went, instead this legend suggests suggests that they helped in the aftermath. Apparently some people out there think that the Chernobyl disaster wasn't as bad as it should have been. I don't think they mean it in as bad of a way as that sounds, but rather they are just surprised that the amount of people who passed away in the disaster wasn't higher, considering how bad the whole ordeal actually was. This, coupled with an apparent eyewitness account from a man named Michele Reyes, who claimed he saw a fiery ball of light hovering for a few minutes above the exposed reactor on the night of the incident, has led people to speculate that maybe our friendly alien neighbors swooped down in the nick of time to help clean up the mess that was made. Apparently this ball of light was also seen on September 16, 1989, when there was more radiation leaking from the unit at Chernobyl, which some claim was the aliens containing the radiation. Honestly, I'd like to think that this one is true, because what a nice thing for the aliens to do. They probably have their own nuclear weapons, so they certainly didn't need ours, and we didn't really have the tools to clean it up, so I can definitely appreciate the fact that they lended a helping hand.
Starting us off at number 10 are Dewey's old favorite, dolls. Remember this one? Yeah, so in case you missed a few of our other Chernobyl videos, there are large piles of creepy, most likely possessed, burned up, radioactive dolls everywhere. Where are they coming from? Well, odds are most of these are actually coming from tourists and people looking to grab that one spooky and scary pic for the gram, but no one knows how this all came to be. It's hard to know if this started from actual dolls that witnessed the explosion, or if someone just had the bright idea one day to start adding messed up dolls all over the exclusion zone. In the end, we will never know, because unless you are a regular there at the exclusion zone, it's hard to distinguish which dolls have been there since day one and which ones are new additions. Either way, I hate all of it. At number 9, we have missing silver filters. Remember those pile of creepy dolls? Yeah, of course you do, it literally just freaking happened. Well, in addition to the piles of dead dolls, there are also piles of old gas masks everywhere, especially in one old school classroom. Some cheeky and hilarious, sick person even put some of these masks on dolls. Isn't that great? Anyway, what is mysterious about these gas masks is that these filters inside of all of them have been removed, and these filters contain just a small amount of silver in them, and what is most likely what happened is that looters came and took all of them. But what was done with the silver? No one really knows. If looters did indeed steal them, then I'm guessing that somewhere out there some people have radioactive jewelry or even silverware, because they most likely sold it. It's hard to say, but if any of you watching have your own Geiger meters at home right now, I would check it out on anything silver in your home, because you might just have a Chernobyl souvenir without even knowing it. At number 8, we have survivor immortality. While this one doesn't take place in Chernobyl exactly, it stems from Chernobyl. One Russian scientist who survived the explosion back in 1986 and 6 other Russian scientists have recently relocated to the small Greek island of Gavdos. There is some conspiracy though, because some believe that these scientists actually relocated to the island to become immortal. Gavdos has 50 residents in total on the island, and it is believed to have mythical healing powers that make its residents immortal. Reporters from Vice interviewed a filmmaker who was making a documentary on the island and found out that the scientists work on various inventions from inside the local compound. They also have 7 acres of land that was given to them by a priest. Some think these Russian scientists are spies, while others believe they moved out there to not only become immortal themselves, but also clear them of all the radiation using the mystical powers of the island. They are apparently also building a temple named the Temple of Apollo. I think these guys were a little too close to the blast, if you know what I mean. At number 7, we have the random examination chair. Out in the middle of a wooded area in the exclusion zone is a random gynecologist's chair. How the hell did it get there? No one freaking knows. It can only be assumed that this chair was picked up by some local pranksters who went through the trouble of picking up this radioactive artifact and brought it to a random spot in the woods. But that is so much freaking work. I mean, guys, why? Aside from that, every other possibility is straight up terrifying. Maybe the blast blasted the chair out in the forest, but if it did, then why was there one of these chairs so close to a freaking radioactive reactor? See, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So it's just another unproven, less than appealing site that can be found in the exclusion zone. At number 6, we have silhouettes. You may remember this one from one of my other Chernobyl videos too. The mystery here is we have no idea if these silhouettes are actually based on real people or if it's just a morbid art piece done by another Chernobyl creepy artist. New silhouettes show up all of the time, all over the town of Pripyat, and the only other mystery here is who is behind it. Is it one talented artist, or is it a group that has decided to take turns so no one ever gets the true answer? No matter what, these things sure do add to the creep factor of this ghost town, and I'm sure it's also a terrifying sight to see at night. Coming in at our halfway point at number 5, we have a Chernobyl cover-up. In a documentary titled The Russian Woodpecker, Fyodor Alexandrovich explains a conspiracy theory that the Chernobyl blast was actually orchestrated to cover up the failure of the Russian woodpecker. Now, it wasn't a Russian bird or the Russian version of Woody the Woodpecker. The Russian woodpecker was actually an array radar that was meant to detect missiles before they were launched. The device was named after its woodpecker-like sound it would make during its operation. It cost 7 billion rubles and unfortunately did not work. It is suspected that it didn't work because of the northern lights messing with its signals, but it can't be for certain. So instead of suffering this terrible embarrassment, the Chernobyl plant that was known for its instability blew up, distracting everyone from the failure of the woodpecker. It's hard to say how likely all of this is, but when shooting the woodpecker documentary, apparently some pretty weird stuff happened to the documentary crew, such as visits from secret police services, as well as even one crew member being shot by a hidden sniper during the Euromaidan protests. Whatever the truth is here, it sounds like they were putting their nose where it wasn't wanted. At number 4, we have no containment building. Back in 1986, when the Chernobyl explosion actually happened, there was quite mysteriously no containment building that surrounded the reactors. Usually there are containment structures around radioactive places like the reactors located in Chernobyl. They are gas-tight structures that are usually made of steel reinforced concrete, so it can confine fission products that could release into the atmosphere during an accident if one were to happen. Sure enough, we all know that one happened here, and interestingly enough, it was not prepared for an accident that dangerous. According to author Richard Mueller of the book Physics for Future Presidents: The Science Behind the Headlines, if there would have been a containment unit around the reactors, Mueller believes that there would have been virtually no deaths. Interesting. I wonder if this coincides with any of the conspiracy of the Russian woodpecker as mentioned before. Maybe. Starting us off in our top 3, at number 3 we have alien saviors. In this case, they quite literally came in peace. An eyewitness by the name of Mikhail Varitsky claimed to have seen a large fireball of light hovering above the reactor on the night of the explosion. Later on September 16th in 1989, apparently there was another huge radiation leak, and it is reported that this same ball of light was seen in the exact same spot once again. Many believe it to be aliens that were actually protecting us from the radioactive blast. Some claim that the blast was nowhere near as big as what it could have been, and that these aliens actually helped absorb and clean up whatever extra radiation that they could to save us. You know me, I'm all about the alien theories, but I'm not sure about this one. I will say, many say similar events happened during the Fukushima accident as well. Oh well, aliens, if you are listening to me right now and you did help us, thank you. Now, show yourself. At number 2, we had the Blackbird of Chernobyl. In April of 1986, right before the explosion in July, many reported seeing a large creature that looked like a blackbird flying around Chernobyl. This creature was large with red glowing eyes and was compared to America's legend, the Mothman. Why? What's so similar between a large Mothman and a large blackbird? Well, both of these creatures had large glowing red eyes, as well as both showed up right before major events. The Mothman appeared and was spotted right before the Silver Bridge collapse in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1967, which reportedly killed 46 people. Some survivors of the Chernobyl blast reported seeing this giant scary creature fly away from the reactor after the blast. Many believe that this bird was a paranormal entity that was a harbinger of terrible things to come. Others believe it was just a large stork. I don't know what to believe here, but the idea of a giant paranormal creature that is similar to the one that was seen in the US 20 years before gives me goosebumps in the best way possible. I love monster and ghost lore, which is what brings us to our number 1 spot. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have my favorite, ghosts. That's right, not just named a ghost town because it's abandoned, but also because there are many different spirits that are said to be found here. Andrei Karsukov, a nuclear physicist from New York, told one story after his visit to the area back in 1997. Karsukov reports that he went to the power station one day at 7:30 a.m. and visited the number 4 reactor in the sarcophagus. You know, the big containment unit structure that they should have had on there before the explosion? Yeah, that thing. Well, he could not go inside due to the high levels of radiation, but once he was down there, he could hear screams coming from the inside due to a fire. So what did he do? He ran upstairs to the control room to get help, and once he barged open the door, he was told that he was the first person to open that door in 3 years. He was also told that the only way in was where he was, and if someone came in after him, they would have tripped the alarm. So it was impossible for anyone else to be down there except him. There was also a floodlight that turned on and off at very strange moments evidence leading the crew to believe someone or something was in the building with them. But what was it? I don't know. You be the judge.
Number 10, ghosts. It was a ghost who did the whole thing. Now everything makes sense. There's no way anything could go wrong in the powerhouse known as the USSR unless there was something supernatural afoot. No, I'm just messing with you. I'm not talking about ghosts pre-explosion, but ghosts after the power plant decided to go kaboom. People say that the site is now haunted by people who lost their lives in the explosion. One scientist who visited the site in 1997 said he could hear someone screaming from inside the reactor room that they were being burned alive. But the reactor room had been sealed shut and there's no way anyone could get in without a fingerprint scan and a password. So that means there could be some radioactive ghosts just chilling around Chernobyl. That kind of sounds how you make like a second-tier Batman villain. Number 9, the CIA did it. After the release of the critically acclaimed HBO series Chernobyl, I really can't stress enough how much you guys need to watch the show. It's so good. It's literally the highest rated show of all time. What more do you want? Anyways, after the TV series came out, the Russian government released a statement that the TV show was anti-Soviet Union propaganda and that they were going to make their own TV series telling the real story about how the reactor melted down because the CIA sabotaged it and it was all America's fault. This is some major tea on both sides. They're spilling tea about each other. Will Russia and the USA ever learn to get along? Are we gonna have to listen to the two of them complain about each other until the end of time? We should just get these two countries to kiss and get it over with. There has been unbroken sexual tension between these two since Rocky IV. Just start playing nice already, please. Number 8. The Soviet Union sacrificed soldiers. So rumor has it that the Russians sent in robots to try and clean up the explosion site, put out fires, and contain the reactor. But the radiation was so harsh that all the robots broke down. So they went to the next best thing. Soldiers. It said that soldiers were given an ultimatum to date me or I don't want to see you anymore. Wait, I'm thinking about the wrong unstable reactor. No, what the Russian government actually said was spend 2 minutes shoveling sand onto the exposed reactor or go fight in Afghanistan for 2 years. Really, the worst choice ever. Go fight in an intense war where a bunch of people are dying every day and your chances of coming back in one piece are slim to none, or for sure get radiation poisoning. Something interesting about the Russian soldiers who decided to shovel sand onto the exposed reactor, they were called liquidators because they would take shots of vodka before they went in. Vodka was thought to prevent any conditions related to radiation. We really knew nothing back in the day. Number 7, the land is safe to live on. Radiation is very bad, we all know this. Comic books have lied to us. Radiation does not give you any sort of superpowers. If you want superpowers, you need to be an alien or super rich. Those are the only ways. After the Chernobyl disaster, the radiation of the surrounding area was at unlivable levels, or that's at least what the government said. Some people from local villages didn't care, and after everything was said and done, they fought to go back to their homes. They wanted the right to live where they used to live, and they were granted freedom to do so. There are over 100 people living in the exclusion zone, and their life expectancy isn't any shorter than that of the average person. They grow crops, hunt animals, and even drink the water, all of which has recorded high levels of radiation. But no one seems to care or be affected by it. Maybe if someone has a baby born out of there, we'll get our first superhero. Just a little bit of radiation right out of the womb. Maybe that's the trick. Number 6. This could have changed the world. Even though there was an explosion at the Chernobyl plant, it wasn't a massive meltdown. It ruined the surrounding area and the reactor site is still extremely dangerous, but it could have been much worse. If there was a total meltdown, like a Britney Spears 2007 shaving her head level meltdown, running around with Kevin Federline level meltdown, the world would have been a much different place. The nuclear fallout would have made Europe unlivable and millions of people would have died. The Spice Girls would have never existed. It would have been a major bummer on epic proportions. And we can't really know how the whole world would have been affected by this. Maybe it would have only been Europe, but maybe it would have been the whole world getting hit by this nuclear fallout. Maybe all of us would have had to been raised in bunkers just like the Fallout games, and only resurfaced to find super mutants and three-headed dogs running around, and Thriller is still the #1 song on the charts. That actually sounds kinda cool. Number 5, Black Bird. So the Chernobyl disaster was caused by the mismanaging of the nuclear reactor. reactor? Or was it caused by a supernatural being known as the Black Bird? It is said that days leading up to the Chernobyl disaster, people saw a huge black winged creature with glowing red eyes. People believed that it was some sort of demonic entity that came to bring a dark omen to the area. Good news for the Chernobyl scientists, it wasn't their fault at all that the reactor blew. It wasn't because I'm bad at my job, it's just because a mythical beast came to spread dark energy and he did it in the form of a nuclear reactor meltdown. Duh. Some people who were on the site at the time of the explosion said that they saw a dark winged creature flying out of the fire. From now on, that's what I'm gonna do anytime I screw up royally. I'm gonna blame the whole thing on a monster. Did you just rear end me? No. Are you stupid? That was the ghost of Abraham Lincoln. I think you should be a little bit easy on him. When he was alive, cars didn't exist. There were just boxes attached to cars, okay? Number 4. Mutated animals. There's a theory that from the explosion, many of the animals who were in the radiation zone were affected by the blast and caused to mutate. There's even the taxidermied body of a deformed piglet on display at the Chernobyl Museum. There hasn't been extensive research on the matter, so it's unsure if any cancer growth or defects that were found on animals were because of the blast or were gonna happen anyways. Now enough time has passed and so few humans visit the area that the animal population has actually increased. I would say that the Chernobyl disaster caused the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and that they're actually Russian, but TMNT actually came out 2 years before the disaster happened. I guess the Chernobyl version of TMNT would be middle-aged Chernobyl scientist human in great pain. Number 3. The meltdown was a cover-up. Take out your makeup wipes, girl, because we got to uncover some tea. I think that should be my new catchphrase. Well, this is some major tea about the Chernobyl disaster. There is a rumor that the whole thing was a cover-up for a failed secret experiment known as Project Woodpecker. Project Woodpecker was a giant set of radio towers that were supposed to give the Soviet government the ability to detect nuclear missiles before they were launched. If this thing was to work, it would be huge. They could know where other countries were keeping their warheads and if other countries were lying about having nukes at all. But the project failed, and because the people working on the project were so afraid of what would happen to them if the higher ups found out about the failure, it said that they orchestrated something that would distract everyone from the problem and also destroy the problem. Pretty sneaky plan, but kind of a long shot. Too many things would have to go perfectly right for this to be true, but if it is true, it's some major tea. Number 2. The meltdown was caused by the KGB. Girl, if you thought the last one was hot, I got some scorching tea for you. There have been rumors that the whole Chernobyl meltdown was a plot by the KGB to control Europe. By causing the reactor to explode, it would strike fear into the rest of Europe when it came to building their own nuclear power plants. After the whole world was watching as a reactor melted down and almost destroyed the entire continent, not a single soul would get in line to buy a shiny new power plant. Instead, all of Europe would have to rely on Russia for energy, since they have a huge amount of natural resources. This would give Russia an insane level of power for the unforeseeable future. This is hot, hot tea. And number 1 on our list, UFO heroes. Alright, it's time to go way off the rocker with these theories. I was able to dig up some reports of people saying they saw UFOs that helped stop the reactor from becoming a major disaster. Mikhail Vartitsky was there on the day that the reactor went, and he said he saw several glowing objects fly over the broken reactor. He then saw a beam of red light shoot out from the glowing object and then it flew away. People believe that some alien friends came down to have our back in this terrible time of need. They were like humans invented tacos. We must save them.
Starting us off in the number 10 spot is Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Beginning April 20th, 2010, the Gulf of Mexico was hit by the largest marine oil spill in history. This infamous oil spill, sometimes referred to as the Gulf of Mexico oil spill, all began with the Deepwater Horizon oil rig that was essentially a floating platform that was drilling an exploratory well about 18,000 feet deep. However, the disaster struck when the methane gas from the underwater well expanded, blasting through a recently installed concrete core and eventually rising into the drilling rig where it ignited and exploded. The explosion quickly engulfed the drilling platform, taking the lives of 11 workers and forcing the remaining 94 to evacuate. And after just 2 days, the entire rig had sunk. From that point forward, with every passing moment, oil was seeping into the ocean, causing complete environmental devastation. And although BP BP, the oil company, had attempted to halt the leak with remote-controlled underwater vehicles, the oil continued to flow for another 87 days. It's estimated that about 210 million gallons of oil were leaked from the underwater well, affecting nearly 70,000 square miles of ocean. This disaster not only wreaked environmental havoc, but also resulted in major criminal lawsuits for higher-ups in the company. Next up at number 9, Huascan avalanche. What's scary about earthquakes is not only how much damage they themselves can do depending on the magnitude, but what else they can cause depending on where it happens. And what happens when an earthquake happens near the highest mountain in Peru? Unfortunately, the deadliest landslide in the country's history. On May 31st, 1970, a 7.9 magnitude earthquake emanated from about 35 kilometers from Mount Huascan, tragically causing a massive landslide along the mountain. It's estimated that the avalanche sped down the mountain at about 160 kilometers an hour, picking up ice, rocks, and even a giant 700-ton boulder, along with other debris, eventually crashing down at the base of the mountain and burying the surrounding towns. The tragic day resulted in taking the lives of roughly 70,000 people and remains one of the worst disasters the country has faced. Coming in at number 8, Sichuan earthquake. Back in 2008, the mountainous region of Sichuan province in southwestern China faced one of the worst earthquakes in history. Caused by the collision of the Indian, Australian, and Eurasian plates, a huge 7.9 magnitude earthquake erupted, completely destroying roughly 80% of buildings in the affected area. The magnitude was astronomical. Not only did houses, businesses, and schools crumble to the ground, but entire villages and towns were destroyed from the disaster. Plus, if the devastation from that weren't enough, the quake caused multiple landslides, which created about 830 makeshift dams across the region, coincidentally causing widespread flooding, which was then only exacerbated by heavy rainfall. According to the final government assessment, nearly 90,000 people were counted as either dead, missing, or presumed dead. On top of that, an estimated 375,000 were left with serious injuries. But even those who survived the disaster, with or without injury, were greatly affected, as millions of citizens were now homeless, without food, and many without family. Coming in at number 7, mercury poison. In 1908, the Shiso Corporation opened its doors in Minamata City, Japan. For years, they were a fertilizer company, however, they eventually expanded to include chemical production, eventually becoming the most advanced in the country both before and after World War II. In 1932, the Shiso factory started a acetaldehyde production, making 210 tons that year alone. And for over 30 years, between 1932 to 1968, the Shiso Corporation released their wastewater into the bay off Minamata City, not thinking anything of the environmental impact it could have on fisheries or their community. Now, I won't get into the chemistry too deep, but essentially a side reaction of creating this compound led to a very small percentage of methyl mercury, and this mercury was dumped into the bay along with the other wastewater, year after year after year. Over time, it infected the fish in the bay, which were then eaten by the public, and slowly but surely, the citizens of Minamata began contracting severe mercury poisoning. In 1956, the first victim of the disease was discovered, and after that, an epidemic of infection began. After all was said and done, there were roughly 3,000 certified victims of the poisoning, as well as another 10,000 who were compensated after several hefty lawsuits took place. So, although it may not have directly killed the most people, it caused an absolute pandemic, ruining the lives of thousands. Coming in at number 6, Mount Tambora eruption. Back in the year 1816, the world was faced with an incredibly strange occurrence. There was no summer. Countries all over the world, including tropical ones, were reporting incredibly low temperatures, and places like New York were facing snowstorms and frost in July. While at the time no one quite knew what happened, evidence has since suggested that it all had to do with an erupting volcano the year before. But of course, this was not just any earthquake. The legendary eruption occurred April 10th, 1815 at at the Mount Tambora volcano in Indonesia and remains the most powerful volcanic eruption in human history. According to NASA, 150 cubic kilometers of exploded rock flew into the air and would have been visible from about 1,300 kilometers away. But from this giant explosion came so much volcanic ash that it actually reduced the amount of sunlight that could reach the Earth's surface, and from there the temperature in the northern hemisphere dropped 1 degree Fahrenheit. Now, 1 degree might not sound like much, but it was enough to completely overhaul the climate for an entire year. Not only that, but the eruption itself caused roughly 11,000 deaths on site, followed by about 100,000 famine-related deaths for the following year due to crop shortages. Coming in at number 5, the Great Galveston Hurricane. Once upon a time, the small island of Galveston, just off the coast of Texas, was the grandest city in the entire state. It had the biggest port, the most wealth, swanky mansions, and even some of the first telephones and electric lights. However, after one fateful storm on September 8, 1900, the small island city would never be the same. The day began like any other, and although they had received limited news about a storm brewing near the Gulf of Mexico, they didn't think too much of it. Then around 11 a.m. they received a report that the storm was getting worse and the waters were very rough. But still, without the technology we have now, there was no way of knowing what was coming. Finally, around 3 p.m., 2 men ran into town from the beach shouting that the Gulf was looking like a 50-foot tall wall and something bad was headed straight for the island. Shortly after, the storm hit Galveston, the hurricane sweeping in at a whopping 225 kilometers an hour, paired with 6-foot waves crashing into buildings, sweeping away citizens, animals, and everything in sight. According to those who survived the fateful day, the storm went on for hours, not subsiding until the early hours of the next morning, just in time to see the wreckage in broad daylight. The carnage was insurmountable. Not only were roughly 3,600 houses and 600 businesses reduced to nothing but rubble, leaving thousands of citizens without shelter, but between 6,000 to 8,000 people perished during the disaster as well. Their bodies left mangled in the streets for their loved ones to try and identify. To this day, it remains the worst hurricane in US history. Coming in at number 4, the Indian Ocean tsunami. Almost 20 years ago, on December 26, 2004, a catastrophic magnitude 9.1 earthquake struck the undersea off the west coast of Sumatra, Indonesia. Now, as far as earthquakes go, that is almost as bad as it gets. In fact, since 1900, this event is considered the 3rd largest earthquake worldwide. From the time the quake began at 8 a.m. in Indonesia, there was only about 15 minutes before the speeding waves hit land, giving residents very little time to flee to higher ground and try and save themselves or their family. The deadly waves then continued for another 7 hours, devastating not only the nearby coastal areas, but even managed to reach as far as East Africa. Waves of up to 100 feet were crashing down, traveling as fast as 800 kilometers an hour and swallowing everything in its path. The final estimated death toll was 230,000. However, another 2 million people in 14 different South Asian countries, as well as some East African countries, were left completely displaced. To date, this tsunami has taken the lives of more people than any other recorded tsunami in history. Coming in at number 3, the Bola cyclone. On November 12, 1970, an unexpected and deadly storm struck what was at the time called East Pakistan, now known as the region of Bangladesh. The Bola cyclone formed over the Bay of Bengal from the remnants of Tropical Storm Nora. And Nora had spent 2 days over the South China Sea before beginning to intensify and move north towards East Pakistan. Before the storm arrived on land, the surrounding areas were inundated with flooding. Then on the day, the cyclone struck India and Bangladesh with wind speeds of around 185 kilometers an hour, absolutely decimating everything in its path. And tragically, either due to the lack of notice from the Indian Weather Service or not enough understanding of the cyclone's intensity, a proper evacuation plan was not put in place, and around 500,000 lives were lost to the disaster. disaster. However, as you can imagine, the issues didn't stop there. In the aftermath of the tragedy, there was a lot of back and forth and blame placed for not providing proper preparations, many criticizing the government's slow response to the aftermath. Then later that year, as a kind of revolt against the current government, a new opposition party ended up winning in general elections in East Pakistan, something that was completely ignored by West Pakistan. And ultimately, this led to the Bangladesh Liberation War in 1971 and the creation as an independent nation in 1972. Coming in at number 2, the Yellow River floods. The second largest river that runs through China is the Huanghe River, or the Yellow River, and there have been 3 major floods recorded that collectively are considered to be the worst floods in history, as well as some of the most destructive natural disasters ever recorded. The first happened in 1887 when the strategically placed dikes and dams filled with silt, gradually raising the water levels near the lowlands. Then, after a heavy rainfall, the river began to overflow and quickly resulted in the death of somewhere between 900,000 and 2 million citizens, as well as causing mass famine and homelessness across the surrounding areas. Then, several years later, in 1931, the river flooded again. This time, about 88,000 square kilometers of land became completely immersed in water, leaving 80 million people without their homes and killing an estimated 4 million. However, although the second is recorded as the worst flood, the most tragic was the last of these floods in 1938. Between 1937 to 1945, China and Japan were at war with each other in what is now referred to as the Sino-Japanese War. I won't get into all the nitty-gritty details, but essentially during this time, the Chinese were in a full-on resistance against the Japanese, who were attempting to advance their influence in the territory. And unlike the first two, the 1938 flood was intentional. Due to the advancements of the invading Japanese troops during the war, Chinese nationalists, under the force of their leader Chiang Kai-shek, destroyed the productive dams and dikes holding the river at bay, thus causing another catastrophic flood. The 1938 flood killed between 500,000 to 900,000 people, some of whom were soldiers, but many of which were their own civilians. Pretty much anyone that did survive was left as a refugee, their farmlands and homes destroyed by the flood, and resulted in an overall anger and distrust towards their government that took decades to heal. And last up today in our number 1 spot, the Bhopal disaster. On December 3rd, 1984, the city of Bhopal, India was overrun by a catastrophic 45-ton gas leak from the Union Carbide insecticide plant. The leak began in the early hours of the morning, around midnight or so, and was only made worse when the public siren was shut off around 1:30 so as not to alarm the citizens over what, at the time, was believed to be an insignificant leak. To top it off, there was little to no communication between the plant, the Bhopal authorities, and the hospital workers, so no one was properly prepared when things got really bad. A mere hour and a half later, the public siren began wailing, this time for real, as it became evident that there was indeed a huge problem. Many were still asleep as it was around 3 in the morning, and so once the deadly gas reached the nearby towns, more than 3,000 citizens died instantly. However, the tragedy did not end there. The death toll continued to rise, climbing up to nearly 20,000 victims, and another 500,000 faced injuries such as respiratory failures and blindness. Even worse is that after the initial incident, the leak was reported not to have been dealt with properly, and so 300 metric tons of waste remained at the site for decades, contaminating drinking water and causing widespread chronic health problems, birth defects, and fertility issues for citizens until as recently as 2016. On a good note, as of 2004, the government is required to provide clean water to the residents due to the contamination in the groundwater, and in 2010, 7 former employees of the plant were convicted of negligence related to the incident. But nothing will ever change the fact that a gas leak was hidden from the public and killed thousands in their sleep.
Number 10, Nagoro, Japan. From the outside, this city may seem like any other small riverside village in Japan, but the scariest part of this town is its residents. As you journey through the town, you might see an elderly couple tending to their garden, people shopping at the grocery store, and children attending school. But look closely and you will realize that these people aren't actually people. They are life-size dolls. Only around 20 citizens of the village are actual living, breathing humans, the youngest being over 50 years old. So then, why is there a school full of children? 12 plush scarecrows sit at their desks doing homework while being taught by an equally felted teacher. These tableaus are present throughout the entirety of the village, especially in the abandoned and fading buildings, adding a constant creepy aura to the sleepy little town. It began in 2002 when a resident created a scarecrow of her father, and it has only continued to grow since then. Number 9. Centralia, Pennsylvania. Forget Hunger Games: The Girl on Fire, Centralia, Pennsylvania is the city on fire. This ghost town in the United States used to have thousands of residents and had a booming economy and infrastructure thanks to the lengthy coal mines around and underneath the town. In the 60s, however, they discovered they had an issue with illegal dumping and built a massive landfill, and eventually it came time to burn it out. What they didn't realize, however, was that there was a hole connected to the mines at the bottom of the garbage, and the fire quickly spread to the coal mines beneath the town. They didn't realize it until smoke started billowing out of the ground, and they discovered that there was no way to put the fire out. Residents were forced out of the town as the fire was causing people to pass out in their homes, and massive sinkholes were opening up in the ground. Some people fought to stay, however, and the once bustling town now has only about 5 residents. To this day, the fires are still burning, and the coal underground could allow the town to burn for another 250 years. Number 8. Gomantong Caves in Malaysia. This one doesn't come with any horrible tragedy or ghost story, but is instead a terrifying destination for those of us who hate creepy crawlies. When you first enter Gomantong Caves in Malaysia, you'll notice a large amount of excrement on the ground. That's because the caves are home to almost 2 million bats that sleep there during the day. When you get further in, the walls and floors seem to be moving. That's because what's left behind by bats attracts millions of cockroaches into the caves. It's almost impossible to take a step without trampling on a few of the creatures, so it's probably a good idea not to wear your favorite shoes if you plan on taking a tour. It doesn't end there though, as the caves are also home to swarms of giant millipedes. So basically it just sounds like somewhere I have absolutely no interest in visiting. But apparently at around 8 p.m. every night, you can see the bats leaving the cave in what looks like a massive black vortex. So if you're willing to kiss a few cockroaches to be able to see that, well, that's your choice. Number 7. Haw Par Villa in Singapore. This theme park is one of those places that you just can't believe somebody actually thought, hey, this is a good idea, and went ahead with building it. Haw Par Villa in Singapore is an amusement park that is home to mostly creepy and bizarre statues. This place is known as basically the opposite of Disneyland, as it is themed after the underworld, and the main attraction is the 10 Courts of Hell. It was built and intended to teach children about morality, with statues of people being punished for committing certain crimes. I think would be enough to just tell the children that if they sin, they'll have to spend the afterlife at this theme park. Statues include things like animals eating people, half human, half crab creatures, and various other gory tableaus. For those who are fans of the creepy and macabre, this may be a top tier destination spot, but for the rest of us, I think I'll just stick with Disney for now. Number 6. The Stanley Hotel in Colorado. If you're a fan of The Shining, then you're probably already aware of the Stanley Hotel, as this creepy hotel was the basis for the setting of the movie, a visit in 1974 inspiring Stephen King to write the novel, and the pet cemetery on site of the hotel would also serve as inspiration for another book he would write, of course, Pet Sematary. The large estate sitting at the bottom of the Rocky Mountains has a long history, as well as a long history of ghostly hauntings and inexplicable encounters. A ghost tour highlights a lot of the main specters that are said to roam the rooms and halls of the hotel. Stanley himself and his wife Flora apparently remain there, seen within the bar and playing the piano respectively. A few of the rooms are reportedly haunted with specific ghosts, 407 haunted by Lord Dunraven and and 418 is haunted by children who can be heard laughing. Stephen King had stayed within room 217, outside of which a ghost of a young boy is said to appear. The author said he had seen the child himself, and that he was apparently calling out for his nanny. Number 5. Poveglia Island in Italy. Known as Italy's most haunted island and sometimes considered one of the most haunted places in the world, Poveglia Island is home to a long and twisted history. When the bubonic plague was sweeping populations, those who were sick were sent off to Poveglia Island as a sort of quarantine zone, and the same happened when the Black Death was going around. In the late 1800s, an asylum was built on the island. It was poorly constructed and wasn't really used as a place for healing or caring for the sick, but instead as a place of exile for them to be kept away from the rest of the community and to spend the rest of their days. In the 1930s, there was apparently a cruel doctor running the asylum who was responsible for doing unethical experiments on the patients. Eventually, he fell from the bell tower, and while it's long gone, people say that they can still hear the chimes of the bell coming from the island. It is apparently crawling with the ghosts of the many souls who passed away there over the centuries. If you want to check it out for yourself though, you may find it quite difficult, as Italy prevents any tourists from visiting the island, and there is a lengthy application process to even be considered. Number 4. Tronquil Sanatorium in Kamloops, British Columbia. Going up to the Great White North, Tronquil Sanatorium in British Columbia is known as one of the most haunted places in Canada. It was built in 1907 to treat people who were suffering from tuberculosis. It operated this way for many decades until it eventually closed its doors in 1958, as anti-tuberculosis medicine came around in 1940. It became a mental health institution before later becoming a detention facility for young offenders. As with Poveglia, the history of disease and death has led many to believe that the facility and grounds are incredibly haunted, and many people have reported large amounts of paranormal experiences. There are apparently various different ghosts you can spot there, like a mother crying for her child or the sound of children playing. And many people have shared photos from the facility where you can see ghost orbs or the outlines of figures in the dark. One of the main highlights, however, is the tunnels underneath, which were used for transportation and are apparently incredibly haunted. If you're interested, the farm that is now on the property offers tours and even escape rooms. Number 3. Hoia-Baciu Forest in Romania. Known as one of the most haunted forests in the world, Hoia-Baciu is known as the Bermuda Triangle of Romania. The first thing that you'll notice when looking at pictures of the forest are the trees that appear crooked and bent, looking like they're contorting and reaching out for something. There are many legends surrounding the forest, most to do with ghostly and paranormal sightings. There's one story of a girl who disappeared into the forest, only to reappear 5 years later with no memory of what had happened or where she had been. She was wearing the same clothing and apparently hadn't aged at all. There's also another story about a sheep herder and his entire flock of 200 sheep which vanished into the woods, never to be seen again. Those who do enter the forest and make it back out find themselves with mysterious headaches, rashes, and burns with no known explanation. And you know I can't make it through a list without mentioning aliens, so yes, there have been numerous reports of UFOs and extraterrestrials residing within the forest. Number 2. The Paris Catacombs. Claustrophobic underground tunnels filled with 6 million bodies? Of course it's haunted. The Paris Catacombs were created in the 18th century when the cemeteries were becoming overcrowded and they needed to find a quick solution. The 200 miles of tunnels lined with skeletons are home to plenty of ghost stories, legends, and petrifying encounters. One of the most famous stories comes from the 1990s when a group was exploring the dark tunnels and they found an abandoned camera. It had footage on it, and when they played it, they were disturbed to find footage of a man who was clearly lost, running through the catacombs before he eventually drops the camera. Nobody knows what happened to the man or where he ended up. It's also said that if you're there after midnight, the walls will start to speak to you, dismembered voices urging you to venture deeper and deeper into the tomb until you're no longer able to find your way out. Number 1. The Island of the Dolls. In the mid-20th century, a man named Don Julian left his wife to live alone on an island on a lake in Mexico. Shortly after he had moved there, he discovered the body of a girl in the river, followed by a doll floating by. He took the doll and hung it from a tree in an attempt to appease the girl's spirit, but apparently it wasn't enough. For the next 50 years, he would collect dolls from the trash and canals and hang them from all the trees on the island. The dolls and toys are all in various states of disrepair, some completely falling apart, making it one of the creepiest islands on Earth. In 2001, Don Julian himself passed away, his body being discovered in the river. The dolls that still remain on this island to this day are supposedly haunted, there being many reports of their eyes moving to look at you, their arms moving as though to reach out to you, and apparently whispering to each other in the night. If the photos of the island aren't enough to scare you away, you can get onto the island for yourself for just around $2 a person. But once again, I'll leave the exploration up to you guys.